Vintage rustic living room ideas. Creating timeless charm and cozy comfort. The living room is the heart of any home. A place to relax, entertain, and spend quality time with family. If you're drawn to the warmth and character of rustic decor combined with the charm of vintage elements, then a vintage rustic living room could be the perfect fit for your home. This design style is an invitation to embrace time-worn pieces and rustic materials, creating a space that feels both inviting and full of history. In this video, we will explore various vintage rustic living room ideas that will help you infuse your space with timeless charm, warmth, and personality. From the selection of furniture and accessories to the color palette and layout, these ideas will inspire you to create a cozy and stylish living room with a vintage rustic flair. Understanding vintage rustic living room style. Before diving into the specific ideas, it's important to understand what defines a vintage rustic living room. The style combines two key elements. Rustic, often characterized by natural materials like wood, stone, and metal. Rustic design focuses on creating a warm, organic feel. The use of distressed furniture, raw textures, and earthy tones connects the space to the outdoors and nature. Vintage. Vintage design includes elements from past decades, such as antique furniture, retro patterns, and nostalgic accessories. It evokes a sense of nostalgia and timelessness, offering a blend of elegance and history. When combined, these two styles create a cozy, timeless space where worn furniture pieces, warm hues, and layered textures come together to create a welcoming atmosphere. A vintage rustic living room exudes a sense of relaxed charm and comfortable sophistication. Choosing the right furniture for a vintage rustic living room. Furniture is one of the most important elements when creating a vintage rustic living room. The key is to choose pieces that balance rustic materials and vintage design, resulting in a room that feels both warm and lived in. Comfortable sofas and seating. The sofa is the centerpiece of any living room, and in a vintage rustic design, it should offer both comfort and style. When choosing a sofa for a rustic vintage living room, look for the following options. Leather sofas. Leather furniture is timeless and ages beautifully, making it an ideal choice for a vintage rustic living room. Opt for distressed or aged leather to add a touch of vintage appeal. A deep brown or rich cognac color will complement the rustic feel of the room while adding warmth. Slip-covered sofas. Slip-covered sofas made from linen or cotton in neutral tones such as white, beige, or gray are also perfect for a vintage rustic space. The casual, relaxed look of a slipcover adds to the cozy vibe of the room. Chesterfield sofas. A vintage-inspired Chesterfield sofa with tufted upholstery and rolled arms adds an elegant touch to the rustic aesthetic. Choose a velvet or leather material for a luxurious yet rustic feel. Antique and vintage chairs. Chairs with a history are essential in a vintage rustic living room. Look for pieces that tell a story and add character to the space. Some options include wingback chairs. Wingback chairs with a vintage pattern or distressed upholstery add a sense of history and sophistication. Choose fabric with a floral or plaid print for a more vintage look. Wooden rocking chairs. A wooden rocking chair with a weathered finish evokes nostalgia and provides a great spot for relaxing. The smooth, timeless design complements the rustic elements of the room. Mid-century modern chairs. For a touch of mid-century flair, consider adding chairs with clean lines and wooden legs. Vintage-inspired armchairs or accent chairs in bold colors or patterns will add interest to the space. Rustic wooden furniture. Wood is a cornerstone of rustic design, and incorporating reclaimed wood furniture into your vintage rustic living room is a great way to bring in the natural, earthy aesthetic. Look for the following pieces. Coffee tables. A vintage wood coffee table with a distressed finish is a perfect focal point for the living room. Opt for reclaimed wood tables that show signs of wear for added character. Side tables. Side tables made from wood or metal with a patina finish add texture and balance to the room. A pair of vintage side tables on either side of the sofa creates symmetry and visual interest. Bookshelves and storage. Incorporating vintage or rustic shelving units in your living room helps with organization while contributing to the room's design. Look for open shelving made of reclaimed wood or wrought iron to maintain the rustic vibe. Color palette for a vintage rustic living room. The color palette of your vintage rustic living room should reflect the warmth, earthiness, and timelessness of the design. Neutral tones, soft pastels, and deep jewel tones work well to create a cozy, inviting atmosphere. Earthy neutrals. Earthy neutrals such as beige, taupe, warm grays, and soft browns are ideal for the rustic aspect of the design. These colors evoke a sense of calm and natural beauty. You can incorporate these tones into walls, furniture, and accessories for a grounded and cohesive look. Muted pastels. Soft pastels, such as faded blues, sage greens, and dusty pinks, add a vintage touch without overwhelming the space. These colors pair beautifully with natural wood tones and vintage-inspired furniture pieces. Deep jewel tones. For a more dramatic and sophisticated look, incorporate deep jewel tones such as emerald green, mustard yellow, or navy blue. These colors create a cozy, intimate feel in a vintage rustic living room while adding richness and warmth. White and off-white accents. White, off-white, and creamy hues help balance out the rich tones in a vintage rustic room. These lighter colors can be used on walls, ceilings, and accessories like throw pillows or blankets to keep the space feeling fresh and airy. Adding vintage accents and decor. Vintage accents and decor items bring personality and charm to a rustic living room. Incorporating antique finds, retro accessories, and nostalgic elements can elevate the overall look of the room. Antique mirrors. An antique or vintage mirror is a perfect way to add character and elegance to a rustic living room. Look for mirrors with distressed frames, whether in wood or metal, to complement the rustic atmosphere. A large vintage mirror can be placed above a fireplace or on a feature wall to create the illusion of more space and light. Vintage rugs. Area rugs can tie the room together, and vintage or vintage-inspired rugs are a great way to add texture and color to the floor. Persian, Oriental, or kilim rugs in muted tones are ideal for a rustic living room. These rugs bring warmth, pattern, and history into the space. Layered rugs. To add depth and texture, consider layering multiple rugs. A larger vintage rug can be placed underneath a smaller, more colorful rug to create contrast and visual interest. Worn-in throw blankets. A well-placed throw blanket can add a cozy, lived-in feel to the room. Choose chunky knit or woven throw blankets in neutral colors or vintage patterns like plaid or floral. Drape them over the back of a chair or sofa for added texture and comfort. Vintage clocks and wall decor. Vintage clocks, whether they're from the mid-century or earlier eras, add a functional and stylish element to the room. Consider a large wall clock with a weathered finish or a smaller antique-style clock to place on a side table. You can also incorporate vintage artwork or old photographs to add personality to your walls. Rustic lighting fixtures. Lighting plays an important role in creating ambience in a vintage rustic living room. Look for rustic lighting fixtures with a vintage twist to complement the overall design. Industrial pendant lights. Industrial-style pendant lights with exposed bulbs and metal finishes add a vintage touch to the rustic setting. Hang them above the coffee table or in the center of the room. Lamps with distressed bases. Table lamps with distressed wood or metal bases are perfect for a vintage rustic room. Look for lamps with soft fabric shades in neutral or warm tones. Chandeliers. For a more dramatic touch, consider adding a vintage chandelier made from wrought iron, wood, or crystal. A chandelier will elevate the rustic living room while adding an element of elegance and sophistication. Incorporating natural elements and textures. A rustic living room should always have a connection to nature, and incorporating natural materials and textures will enhance the space's authenticity. Wood elements. Wood is a staple in rustic decor, so be sure to include it in your furniture, flooring, and accessories. Wooden beams, exposed rafters, or reclaimed wood paneling on the walls will add depth and texture to your space. Wooden accents. Small wooden accents, such as driftwood sculptures, wooden bowls, or wooden picture frames, can add warmth and charm to the room. Natural fabrics. Incorporate fabrics like linen, cotton, and wool in throw pillows, blankets, and curtains to bring texture and natural beauty to the space. These materials have a timeless quality and work well with both vintage and rustic elements. Indoor plants. Add greenery to your vintage rustic living room with a few indoor plants. Plants such as ferns, ivy, or snake plants will bring life and color to the room. Place plants in vintage-style pots or baskets for an added rustic touch. Layout and flow. The layout of a vintage rustic living room should prioritize comfort and functionality while allowing the rustic and vintage elements to shine. Here are a few tips for creating the perfect layout. Create zones. In larger living rooms, create different zones for various activities. For example, designate a cozy reading nook with a vintage chair and a floor lamp, or a conversation area with a sofa and chairs arranged around a rustic coffee table. Flow and movement. Ensure that there is a natural flow between furniture and traffic patterns. Arrange furniture in a way that encourages conversation and easy movement. A timeless vintage rustic living room. A vintage rustic living room is a space that feels both timeless and full of warmth. By blending rustic charm with vintage elegance, you can create a cozy and inviting space that is full of character. Whether you're incorporating antique furniture, vintage accessories, or natural textures, the key is to choose pieces that speak to the soul and evoke a sense of history. With the right combination of furniture, color palette, lighting, and decor, you can transform your living room into a vintage rustic retreat that you and your guests will cherish for years to come. So start bringing in those vintage treasures, add a few rustic accents, and create a living room that tells your story.